All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. The Alpha Programmer, Crushing Software Development with Agility, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Crushing Woke Tech, a red-pilled map for the argument nobody wants to have. The question lands like a surgical blade. If breastfeeding is truly a free choice, why does the refusal to breastfeed trigger a tribunal of moral condemnation demanding public explanation? Watch the feminist machinery seize up. The sacred word choice is deployed endlessly when women select abortion, career, or casual sex. But the moment a mother declines to nurse, the rhetoric flips. Suddenly it's not a choice. It's a failing requiring justification, a deviation from nature that must be explained away with medical excuses, personal trauma, or elaborate confessions of inadequacy. Notice the pattern. The ideology claims agency when it benefits female prerogative, but imposes moral duty when the same agency would produce an outcome the sisterhood disapproves. This is gamma bias in its purest form. Female agency is exaggerated when convenient, minimized when inconvenient. The same women who insist men must accept their reproductive choices without question will turn and shame a mother who chooses formula over breast. The double standard is so stark, it would be comical if it weren't enforcing a care ratchet that extracts female labor while pretending to liberate it.
We know as attempted defense that the shaming is about health outcomes, not morality, is a textbook Moat and Bailey. The public discourse is drenched in moral language. Best for baby, selfish choice, lazy mother.
The health claim is the defensible fortress. The moral condemnation is the territory being expanded. If it were purely medical, a simple formula is adequate nutrition would end the conversation. Instead, we get guilt trips, lactation consultants, hospital policies, and peer pressure campaigns that treat bottle feeding as a tragedy. The health argument is the camouflage for the moral enforcement. What follows is a logic audit. We will define terms. What is a free choice? What constitutes a moral failing? We will test consistency. Apply the same standard to men's choices. Fathers who don't take dangerous jobs, who don't pay above court-ordered child support, who choose career over family. Are those treated as free choices or moral failings? We will trace incentives. Who benefits from the breastfeeding mandate? Which institutions gain power by pathologizing refusal? We will expose the implicit premise that female bodies are public goods with duties to the collective, and that refusal to perform that duty is a betrayal requiring penance. The ideology collapses under its own weight. If breastfeeding is a choice, the shaming is illegitimate. If it is a duty, then the choice rhetoric is a lie. You cannot have both. The sisterhood wants the rhetorical benefits of choice without the accountability of genuine agency. This essay will dissect that contradiction, show how it reveals the deeper pattern of feminist special pleading, and restore the logos that the fog of gamma bias has obscured. The question: if breastfeeding is a free choice, why is the refusal to breastfeed treated as a moral failing requiring public explanation? Why it pops the ideology? The ideology claims choice is absolute, but defines any deviation from the biological norm as a failure of will or a symptom of oppression. thereby replacing biological necessity with ideological compulsion under the banner of liberation, the child version. If I can pick my ice cream, why do you yell at me for picking vanilla? Follow-up questions. Does the pressure come from the baby's hunger or the mother's shame? Why is the father's choice to not breastfeed never questioned? Is the mother's body a tool for the child or a temple for the self? Who decides that the optimal amount of milk is the only acceptable amount? Why is the cost of breastfeeding borne by the woman while the benefit is borne by society? If the mother knows her body best, why is her instinct overridden by the doctor's chart axis question bank? The definition of choice versus coercion. Best question. If the choice is truly free, why is the wrong choice pathologized as a lack of education or willpower? Is the shame I feel for not breastfeeding a result of my own biology or the society's judgment? Grammar, logical basis, burden of proof, shifts the locus of the problem from the individual to the observer. Why it lands, it forces the critic to admit that the pressure is external, thus invalidating the claim that the mother is choosing freely without coercion. Why is formula feeding called a backup plan if it is a valid equal choice? Grammar, logical basis, loaded language exposes the hierarchical framing of the choice. Why it lands, it reveals that the ideology does not value choice but values the correct choice. The medicalization of natural instinct. Best question, why do we need a beautyrometer to measure the quality of a mother's love? When love is not a measurable commodity, if milk is just food, why is it treated as a sacred sacrament in feminist discourse? Grammar, logical basis. Category error, conflates nutritional utility with moral significance. Why it lands, it strips the ideological veneer from the biological act, exposing the arbitrary elevation of a natural function. Who decides that the optimal amount of milk is the only acceptable amount? Grammar, logical basis. Authority challenges the source of the standard. Why it lands, it exposes the arbitrary nature of the expert consensus. The gender double standard of labor. Best question, why is the father's absence from the feeding process celebrated as helping, while the mother's presence is expected as default? If breastfeeding is a choice, why is the father's choice to not breastfeed never questioned? Grammar, logical basis, double standard, tests the consistency of the choice argument across genders. Why it lands, it reveals that the choice is gendered. Women are obligated to choose the biological role, men are exempt. Is the mother's body a tool for the child or a temple for the self? Grammar, logical basis, property rights exposes the conflict between autonomy and duty. Why it lands, it forces a definition of the mother's bodily sovereignty, the economic hypocrisy of corporate support. Best question, why do corporations demand breastfeeding-friendly policies while paying women less for the same work? Why is the cost of breastfeeding pain, time, inconvenience borne by the woman, while the benefit, healthy child, is borne by society? Grammar, logical basis, cost-benefit asymmetry, highlights the unfair distribution of burdens. Why it lands, it reveals the ideological claim of empowerment masks a reality of extraction. Is the pressure to breastfeed a benefit or a tax on women's bodies? Grammar, logical basis, economic framing, reframes the biological act as labor. Why it lands, it exposes the exploitation inherent in the natural argument, the epistemology of expert authority. Best question, if the mother knows her body best, why is her instinct overridden by the doctor's chart? Why is the science of breastfeeding always changing, yet the shame of formula is constant? Grammar, logical basis, falsifiability, highlights the instability of the scientific claim versus the stability of the social norm. Why it lands, it reveals that the science is a tool for control, not a truth to be discovered. Who is the expert? The woman feeling the pain or the man reading the book? Grammar, logical basis, authority, challenges the source of knowledge. Why it lands, it exposes the patriarchal structure of medical authority, the burden of proof on the mother. Best question, why must the mother prove her milk is good enough, while the father's contribution is assumed good enough by default? Why is the failure to breastfeed a personal flaw, while the success is a collective victory. Grammar, logical basis, attribution error exposes the selfishness of the collective claim. Why it lands, it reveals the ideological appropriation of the mother's labor. Is the mother's body a public trust or a private asset? Grammar, logical basis, property rights defines the scope of the mother's obligation.
Why it lands, it forces a clear definition of the mother's duty. Dr. Winona attempts the defense.
As a professor of gender studies and a high coven member of the Feminist Marxist Academy, I must address the persistent and frankly reactionary backlash against the enlightened consensus on breastfeeding. The question is not whether breastfeeding is a choice, of course it is, in the most liberated sense of the term, but to frame this as a simple consumer preference, like selecting a flavor of ice cream, is to commit a category error of staggering proportions. One does not merely choose an infant feeding method. The way one chooses a handbag, one aligns oneself with the optimal, evidence-based, and naturally ordained pathway for maternal-child bonding and public health. The confusion arises because critics fail to understand that choice in the context of empowered motherhood is not a value-neutral menu. A true choice requires informed consent, and informed consent necessitates understanding that formula is a medical intervention, a substitute for a biological norm, not an equal alternative. When a mother chooses formula, she is not exercising freedom. She is often capitulating to patriarchal work structures, inadequate state support, or internalized shame about her own body's capacity. Therefore, the social pressure to breastfeed is not coercion. It is compassionate correction. It is the loving guidance of a community that knows better than the individual what constitutes genuine liberation from the exploitative systems that would sever her from her natural maternal duty. This brings us to the gendered dimension, a favorite blind spot of the manosphere. To ask why is the father's choice to not breastfeed never questioned is to willfully ignore biology. Men do not lactate. To hold them to the same standard is absurd. The father's role is to support, to provide the economic and emotional scaffolding for the mother's sacred labor. His absence from the feeding process is not a choice, it is a biological given. To frame this as a double standard is to demand a symmetry that nature itself refutes. The burden of proof lies with the mother because she is the one with the mammary gland, the one whose body is the site of the child's first habitat. It is not a burden, it is a privilege, a unique power that the patriarchy has historically sought to control and diminish. The medical establishment, which I am often critical of, has finally caught up with feminist wisdom. The charts, the growth percentiles, the lactogenesis studies, these are not tools of oppression. They are the language of logos, of objective truth. When a mother's instinct is overridden by a doctor's chart, it is not an act of patriarchal domination. It is reality correcting sentiment. We must trust the data over the dysregulated feelings of a sleep-deprived woman who has been fed a lifetime of consumerist propaganda that tells her she can have it all without sacrifice. The choice to breastfeed is the choice to accept the truth of your biology, to reject the ersatz comfort of the bottle, and to participate in the restoration of a maternal order that capitalism and postmodernism have worked tirelessly to destroy. So yes, the refusal to breastfeed requires an explanation, not because we are judging the mother, but because we are diagnosing a system failure. We are asking what social, economic, or psychological obstacle has been placed between this woman and her natural destiny. To call this shame or coercion is to mistake the firm hand of guidance for the fist of oppression. It is the same logic that calls discipline abuse and calls moral clarity hate. The path to liberation is not through the avoidance of discomfort, but through the embrace of the difficult, the natural, and the true. And that truth begins at the breast. Theory critique. We are surrounded by systems that claim to offer freedom while fastening the shackles tighter. The feminist academic complex has mastered this dark art, wrapping authoritarian compulsion in the glittering language of liberation and choice. To defeat these systems, you must learn to isolate their core contradiction, pin it down with unyielding definitions, and cross-examine it until the entire ideological facade collapses. We will perform this exact operation on the discourse surrounding breastfeeding. We will use the tools of grammar, logic, and rhetoric to dismantle the arguments of our hypothetical subject, Dr.
Winona, a perfect distillation of the gynocentric, academic thought police. The question, every ideological structure has a load-bearing weakness. If you strike it precisely, the whole edifice falls.
Our winning question is a grammatical and logical precision strike. If breastfeeding is a free choice, why is the refusal to breastfeed treated as a moral failing requiring public explanation? Look at the grammar. Free choice dictates a volitional act between alternatives, where no single selection carries a punitive moral weight. Moral failing dictates a deviation from an obligatory standard. These two terms are mutually exclusive. You cannot have a menu of equally valid options if selecting the wrong one places you under immediate suspicion of systemic failure or personal defect. The ideology wants the political capital of the word choice, because choice sounds liberated, modern, and feminist. But it demands the enforcement mechanism of the word duty, because the underlying biological and social engineering requires female compliance. It is a linguistic bait and switch. Why the ideology cannot answer it, Doctor.
Winona attempts to escape this trap by redefining the English language. She argues, one does not merely choose an infant feeding method.
A true choice requires informed consent, and informed consent necessitates understanding that formula is a medical intervention. This is a breathtaking equivocation.
In ethics, informed consent means understanding the risks and benefits of a decision and making it voluntarily free of coercion. Dr. Winona twists informed consent to mean agreeing with the doctor's mandated conclusion.
In her framework, a woman is only informed if she obeys. If she dissents, she is automatically classified as brainwashed by consumerist propaganda. This is the Kafka trap. The ideology strips the woman of her agency. If she breastfeeds, she is a good feminist. If she refuses, she is a victim of the patriarchy. By defining her rejection of the norm as a symptom of oppression, the ideology makes its primary claim unfalsifiable. It refuses to allow the possibility that a rational, fully informed woman might simply look at the physical cost, the time expenditure, and the sleep deprivation and logically decide no.
I value my sanity and my career over a marginal statistical uptick in infant antibodies. The ideology cannot answer the question without admitting it is a prescription, not a liberation. Dr. Winona's fallacy map. When cornered by logic, the genocentric consensus deploys a predictable sequence of rhetorical fallacies to obscure reality. Dr. Winona's defense is a masterclass in evasion.
Let us map the defects, Mort and Bailey. The Mort, easily defended, is the biological fact that breast milk contains antibodies. The Bailey, the indefensible territory she actually occupies, is the assertion that any mother who uses formula is a systemic failure requiring public correction. She retreats to the biology when attacked, but enforces the moral shame in practice. Loaded language, she calls the pressure compassionate correction and the feeding a sacred labor. She frames formula as a capitulation to patriarchy. This is pure emotional manipulation masquerading as academic analysis. Appeal to nature is ought fallacy because women biologically lactate. She argues they ought to breastfeed, and that this specific act is the naturally ordained pathway. Biology does not dictate morality or optimal modern public policy. False dichotomy. You either align with the evidence-based, naturally ordained pathway, or you are a victim of patriarchal work structures. There is no room for a woman making a calculated, selfish, perfectly rational trade-off of her own comfort. Circular reasoning. The system must pressure women because the system knows what is best. How do we know it is best? Because the system's charts say so. Why do the charts matter? Because the system demands compliance to optimize them. The axis, by axis Socratic cross-examination. We do not merely point out fallacies, we dissect the argument piece by piece. We apply the reciprocal standard, the ultimate enemy of the genocentric worldview, the definition of choice versus coercion, the question. If the choice is truly free, why is the wrong choice pathologized as a lack of education or willpower? Dr.
Winona explicitly states that a mother choosing formula is not exercising freedom, but rather internalizing shame about her own body's capacity. This is an epistemological crime. Dr. Winona claims to know the hidden true motives of the mother better than the mother knows herself. She replaces the mother's stated reality with a feminist conspiracy theory.
By pathologizing the wrong choice, the ideology confesses it does not value choice at all. It values compliance.
The gendered double standard of labor. The question, why is the father's choice to not breastfeed never questioned? Dr. Winona's evasion is swift. Men do not lactate. To hold them to the same standard is absurd.
Notice the sleight of hand. She shifts the standard from parental optimization to strict biological mechanics. But if the goal is the optimal evidence-based pathway for the child, why is the father's biological absence from the bonding process treated as a neutral given? Why is there no compassionate correction for the father who fails to optimize his income, his health, or his presence to match the child's needs? Because the ideology relies on a gamma bias asymmetry. It demands female sacrifice as a baseline expectation, while treating male sacrifice as optional. The mother's body is treated as a public utility for the child. The father's body is his own private property. The feminist demand for equality vanishes the exact second the biological bill comes due. The medicalization of natural instinct. The question, if milk is just food, why is it treated as a sacred sacrament in feminist discourse? By elevating a nutritional fluid to the status of a sacred sacrament and a natural destiny, the academic left attempts to bypass rational cost-benefit analysis. If breast milk is just food, we can weigh its marginal benefits against the massive cost to the mother's time, career, and sleep. But if it is a sacrament, any cost-benefit calculation is framed as heresy. This is how the clerical class maintains its authority, by turning mundane realities into untouchable dogmas. The epistemology of expert authority. The question, why is the science of breastfeeding always changing, yet the shame of formula is constant? This is the fatal blow. The medical charts, the lactation studies, and the growth percentiles shift constantly as new data arrives. Yet the social stigma attached to formula feeding remains immovable. If the shame was driven purely by the science, the shame would fluctuate with the data. The fact that the shame is constant proves that the shame is the point. The science is merely a retroactive justification for a pre-existing moral prejudice against female autonomy. The economic hypocrisy of corporate support. The question, why is the cost of breastfeeding, pain, time, inconvenience, borne by the woman, while the benefit healthy child is borne by society? Feminism claims to fight capitalist exploitation, yet in this instance it acts as the enforcement arm of the state and the corporation. The state desires healthy future taxpayers. The corporation desires undistracted workers. The mother is ordered to absorb the physical, temporal, and economic cost of producing that healthy child through sacred labor. If she refuses, she is shamed. This is not liberation. It is a covert tax levied directly upon the female body, enforced by feminist rhetoric. The child test. Strip away the postmodern jargon, the academic titles, and the sociological frameworks. Look at the contradiction through the eyes of a child. A child is given a choice: chocolate or vanilla ice cream. The child picks vanilla. Immediately the adults descend, clucking their tongues, diagnosing the child with a lack of education, and demanding a public explanation for this system failure. The child looks at the adults and asks the obvious, devastating question: if I can pick my ice cream, why do you yell at me for picking vanilla? The child sees what the academic obscures. A real choice does not require a penalty for the unpreferred option. The adults lied. They never wanted to offer a choice. They wanted to offer an illusion of choice while mandating a specific outcome. Dr.
Winona and her ideological kin treat grown women exactly like these children.
They preach the gospel of my body, my choice. But the moment a woman exercises that choice in a way that inconveniences the maternal script, the velvet glove comes off, revealing the iron fist of gynocentric control. They do not want women to be free. They want women to be correct. As men of logic, as builders of systems, we must recognize this pattern. When an institution screams about freedom but punishes dissent, you are not looking at a liberation movement, you're looking at a trap. Name the contradiction, ask the question, do not let the lie stand. You have now seen the mechanism clearly, and you cannot unsee it. The moment a free choice demands a justification for its non-exercise, you are no longer dealing with freedom. You are dealing with obligation wearing choice like a stolen coat. The feminists and their institutional handmaidens want the rhetorical currency of bodily autonomy, my body, my choice, but they refuse to pay the price of that coin, which is that every choice becomes equally valid and equally immune to cross-examination. They want the crown without the crucifixion. They want the rights language of liberalism without liberalism's inconvenient requirement that you treat the chooser as a sovereign agent whose refusal needs no more apology than her compliance. So when the lactation consultant, the mummy blogger, the pediatric nurse practitioner with the nose ring and the sneer, or the mother-in-law weaponized by the state's consensus machinery comes circling, you ask the question and then you stand back and watch the gears lock. If it is free, then no is a complete sentence. If no requires a press conference, then it was never free, and every slogan asserting otherwise was a lie. The contradiction is not a paradox to resolve, it is a confession to collect. Here is how you deploy this. Next time a woman, or the sort of man who carries water for the gynocentric consensus, invokes free choice as an unquestionable shield, do not argue about the specific choice. That is the trap. Do not debate breastfeeding, abortion, career, divorce, hookup culture, or any of the 40,000 domains where female choice has been sacralized beyond examination. Instead, ask the structural question. If this is a free choice, does refusal require a moral explanation? If yes, then you have exposed the obligation hidden inside the freedom, the commandment concealed inside the consent form. If they say no, then hold them to it equally, uniformly, and without the special exemptions they will inevitably demand for the choices they actually care about coercing. The syllogism is surgical. A free choice requires no justification for non-exercise. Breastfeeding refusal requires justification for non-exercise. Therefore, breastfeeding is not treated as a free choice. 3 lines. Irrefutable. The entire cathedral of guilt, shame, and pseudo-medieval moral policing collapses because it cannot survive its own stated premise being read back to it in plain grammar. That is the power of logos applied without apology. It does not need to shout because contradiction is loud enough on its own. Remember this pattern because it repeats everywhere the anti-logos stack operates. Free choice that punishes refusal is obligation disguised as autonomy. Inclusion that excludes dissent is conformity disguised as welcome. Safety that requires forfeiting rights is control disguised as care. Equity that demands unequal treatment is supremacy disguised as justice. In every case, the method is the same. Take the language of freedom, wear it like a skin suit, and use it to smuggle in the very coercion the language was built to prevent. Your job, our job, is to name the trick every time in every room with the calm precision of a surgeon who has seen this tumor before and knows exactly where the scalpel goes. The truth does not need a marketing department. It needs men willing to speak it, while the room holds its breath and the consensus enforcers reach for their thought-terminating cliches. Ask the question, watch them stammer, then walk away knowing you have done the work that civilization requires of free men. You refuse to let a lie pass unchallenged because it wore a kind word, sponsored book. The alpha programmer crushing software development with agility. Men don't read books to feel good. We read to win. If you're holding this, you've felt it. The slow rot of inclusive tech teams prioritizing pronouns over performance, sprint retrospectives devolving into therapy sessions, and deadlines missed because someone's too busy virtue signaling to merge the damn code. I wrote this book after watching a Fortune 500 project implode. The lead engineer, a guy who could debug kernel panics in his sleep, got sidelined for aggressive tone in Slack. They replaced him with a scrum master who spent sprints organizing sensitivity trainings. The product shipped 2 years late. You've seen this, you've lived it. This isn't theoretical. I've coded in trenches where merit mattered. I've led teams that shipped. Then I watched the invasion, HR-mandated diversity quotas, collaborative stand-ups where no one dared criticize broken code, and male devs demoted to accommodate balance. The result? Tech debt, burnout, mediocrity. Here's the truth. Evolution wired men to dominate complex systems. Studies prove it. 92% of open-source maintainers are male. Testosterone fuels problem-solving. Navius EALs thrive under crunch time because pressure is our native habitat, yet the industry punishes this reality, swapping survival of the fittest for participation trophies. This book is for men ready to reclaim their edge. You'll learn why Amazon's all-male 2-PISA teams deliver 3x faster than diversity hires, how Linus Torvalds' Darwinian code reviews built an OS that runs the planet, why divorced coders lose 34% productivity, and how to dodge the marriage plantation. You'll master toxic feedback loops that crush bugs, not feelings. If you're a guy who thinks emotional labor belongs in marriage vows, not Jira tickets, this is your playbook. If you still believe competence beats consensus, read on to everyone else. Social justice keyboard warriors, HR, harpies, men who think vulnerability is strength. Close this book now. Go knit a gender-neutral scarf. We've got software to ship. The alpha programmer doesn't beg for approval. He builds, he ships, he wins. Let's hunt. The Alpha Programmer. Crushing Software Development with Agility. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now. Links in description.